Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today with me I have a fellow candidate, Miss Michelle Lindsay. How are you doing, Michelle?
Thank you, Payman. Thank you for having me on. I'm doing well today.
No, thank you for coming on. Michelle, I thought to get things started, could you maybe tell the audience a little about yourself, please?
Oh, okay. I'm a Canadian. I grew up in Quebec, and I'm an Anglophone from. My family's Anglophone from New Brunswick, actually, and my parents met in Montreal, and so raised three girls in Montreal, and from there, I had my college, my university, and then after university, I actually worked for a while in the um, medical dental device field, and we it was the dental implant field. And I actually traveled across Canada, lived in Vancouver, lived in Toronto, and now live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I was never political. You would ask me that before. Was never into politics. Actually, when I was in CEGEP, I actually didn't really enjoy the political science class and never took it again. But when and then when I went into university, I actually took Bachelor of Commerce at McGill, and an array of courses from accounting, finance, marketing research, business development, entrepreneurship, and statistics. And from there, understood that, yeah, sure, there's a dynamic in building a business, and there's a dynamic in our country. And learned French much better after university. I actually had a reason to be able to communicate in French and actually present business presentations in French as well. And when I moved here, actually, it's when I started to see a change when I had children. And I, first met Max in 2018, and I thought, I'm going to go to one of his presentations, and everything he said actually aligned with everything I was thinking. And, that first time that I met him, I said, if you need people to run, I will run. And I always thought to myself, well, I had to say it out loud because then I was committed. That's how I feel about anything that I do. If I say it out loud, I'm committed.
So you said that you reached out to Max in 2018, and you said you would run. For people who've never run for office, or people or the candidates that are brand new at this, there's like a level of fear that you have to overcome. What gave you the courage to overcome that fear?
I think adversity throughout my life. Growing up in Quebec, I was an Anglophone, and there were challenges that had to be overcome. You had to ensure that you weren't going to only speak English. You had to learn French, and sometimes I found that the French in elementary and in high school and in college wasn't up to par with actual conversation French. So then what had happened was after university, I knew that I wanted to have as much opportunity as possible within my region, within Quebec, and throughout Canada. So I did take two different courses, conversational courses, presentation courses, and knew that if you actually wanted to overcome any adversity, then you had to take the action yourself. And so when I did say to Max that I was going to run, I thought, oh, what's this going to be about? And I knew that there would be pushback because our policies weren't popular at the time. Uh, you know, um, the Liberals and the Conservatives had different ideas of how to run the country. So did the NDP. But I felt I was traditional, and I felt I was coming from another angle than if we lived in just an English province. I was coming from the province of Quebec, where they actually were nationalists, were protecting their culture, their society, their French language, and I understood what it was to be able to do that. Because I used to push back as an Anglophone. I used to push back and wonder, oh, why do we have to have Office de la Langue Française protecting the French language? Well, when I left French Quebec, I thought, yeah, I understand why. And we need to be able to do that in Canada as well, because we're not doing it.
I want to go back to something you said earlier, where you said the PPC's policies, they weren't popular at the time. Can you tell us what the policies were? And I'm assuming you implying that they're popular now. What's changed?
Well, the immigration wasn't a popular policy. Max had the foresight to know that the immigration numbers were going to be a problem, and he could see it in the future and what was going to happen. And he was right. He was dead on. And we also, because his numbers at the time in 2019, I believe, he wanted immigration to be around 100,000 to 150,000 a year, and we were already at 350,000 to 400,000 people coming into Canada. And so he saw a big problem that we were going to see in the future, and he was completely right. We had billboards that were created by Kinsella that were actually, along the lines of what we believed. However, we would never have said that, stop mass immigration. It just wasn't the verbiage back then. It was, we wanted targeted immigration. We wanted smart, intelligent immigration. And that's what our message was. But a lot of people, thought we were racists and white supremacists when we said that we had to really watch immigration numbers, because there could be an imbalance, and we're seeing that now, an imbalance in the housing units that are available for everyone. He started talking about defunding the CBC. He started talking about not foreign investment, but giving money to other countries so that they could build roads and infrastructures and have their programs when we actually needed help for our Canadians. So he started looking at defunding the CBC, and less people were looking at the CBC, and more the CBC was becoming disconnect with the population. So that aligned. Another thing that aligned was veterans affairs policies, where there were some veterans serving at the same time but actually registered their pensions at different times, and some were receiving $2,000 payment and others were only receiving a $500 payment. So there was that fragmented receivership or compensation for these veterans. There were a lot, and there was the Multicultural Act that needed to be amended. In the Multicultural Act, it says that all cultures are equal. Well, when you say that all cultures are equal in Canada, that means that people are coming here they're preserving some of their traditions, some of their cultures, and they're not integrating the same way as if you said the Canadian culture and social behavior is the ultimate, and so you're going to want to assimilate. But with that phrase that says all cultures are equal, then there are people that are going to come from, and this is what I feel, Somalia, where female genital mutilation is popular, and then bring it here and then try to replicate that procedure or that tradition here. And I don't think that having that multicultural phrase in there is beneficial to Canadian standards.
Yeah, I think Canadians don't realize how impactful that Multiculturalism Act was, because it was, I think it was under the Mulroney government, so most of us weren't
Yes,
even
it was.
alive then.
Yeah.
So
So you have to think about things like that, I mean, sure, it sounds beautiful and compassionate, but then what happens is you have this fragmentation within our society. People are more interested in maintaining that tradition, that culture, and do they actually want to integrate? And so we really have to look at that. We want a united Canada where everyone's working towards, a common goal. I don't find we're working towards common goals anymore.
agreed. Moving it along chronologically. So we were at 2018. Now it's 2019. You're the candidate and you start campaigning. What challenges did you run into, or what did you learn during that election cycle?
Well, we were a new party, and so our EDA consisted of three people: me, my husband, and an agent, financial agent. And then we reached out to many, many people, trying to get them to volunteer, put signs up, and that. Um, I think I only received 900 votes that time. But you know what? There was a lot of pushback. I remember being at an open street fair where all of the candidates from the different parties were invited to have a table at this open street fair in Dartmouth. And I had protesters at mine. And the police actually wanted me to remove my table and go home. And I said, I'm not doing that. I stand up for the Canadian people, and I'm a representative for a party and for possible, if I win, my constituents. So I'm not leaving. I said, if they want to protest in front of me, they're happy. They're able to. It's their right, as long as they don't touch me, as long as there's no violence and it's a peaceful protest. I'm okay with that. And so the police just said, okay, well, we'll be on your side of either side of the table protecting you. And actually, people were coming up to my table, wondering why the attention. And so it actually, it did not help. It did help in a way, but you know what? It actually helped me understand that no one's going to touch me. They just want to protest against my ideas, and a lot of them misunderstood my ideas. As soon as it said I'm a white supremacist in the newspaper, people a lot of people don't even want to do their own research. They're so lazy that they just want to take on someone else's belief system.
These protesters, who were they? Were they just rank and file, or was this, like a bus comes in and 50 protesters come off like a rock style?
Actually, this was downtown Dartmouth, where it's very heavily NDP vote. There's a lot of NDP electors, and there's a large LGBTQ community, and just I was in the lion's den, I guess you could say, and across the street was this large apartment complex, about 8 floors, and it seemed that everyone in there was NDP. And as soon as they saw me setting up the PPC banner in that, they were like phoning people. Oh, they're down there in front of May Garden Chinese restaurant. And so they were calling their friends to come and stand in front of my booth, basically.
I'm reminded of that quote from Zoolander. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. That the reporter's like that's something you don't want to see: ugly protesters bothering beautiful people.
You hate to see something like that at an event like this. Ugly protesters bothering beautiful people.
I can imagine these poorly dressed protesters screaming at you.
Yeah, and but it makes you understand, like, people have different opinions, and it's important to be able to converse with people. I did converse even with the protesters. I'm like, what are you protesting against? Well, you're racist. I mean, and I said, well, can you tell me what makes me that? What makes me a racist? And it was the mass immigration billboard that actually was taken down within 2 days. And because Max's picture was on there, they thought we were the ones who had done that. But, that just wasn't the messaging, the language and the verbiage for that time. We should have had, if it was our billboard that we actually paid for, we probably would have had, Canadians first, or let's do immigration right, that kind of thing, because we're not doing it right. Canadians, now, we've always done it right up until 2015. We always did immigration right. When someone wanted to immigrate, there was the point system. They actually applied to the nearest Canadian embassy to them in their own country, or to a country nearby. And so they didn't set foot in our country. They were already in their country. So it's not like we can say, oh, we're asylum seekers now, because as soon as they set foot, there's this loophole that they can now plead that they're asylum seekers. So we used to do that. We used to have the Canadian embassies, and we used to bring in people who found a job before they even landed here. because you wouldn't want to take jobs away from Canadians. So they had to find the job that no Canadian could fill, and then they would be able to come. But we don't do that now. I recently spoke to a Sikh gentleman who was sitting outside of Tim's, and I was talking to him. I always talk to people, I want to know where they're coming from, how they see Canada. And he said, I was here, I got here last week. And I said, oh, and I said, so what kind of job do you have? And he said, oh, no, I don't have a job yet. He said, I have a work permit. And I said, oh, that's odd. I thought that you would receive a work permit if you had a job and then you came in. I said, so they're doing it the cart before the horse. You come in and then try to find a job. I said, yeah, I don't know if that's the right thing to do because now you're here with no money and you're looking for a job, right? And so, these are people, and I did ask him what brought him to Canada, what attracted him to Canada, what kind of heritage and values in society, attracted him. And he said to me, well, opportunities and green spaces. And
Green spaces?
Green spaces, we're green. And so, when people look at tourism videos of Canada, they probably see places like Fort McMurray or Prince George or Vancouver Island, places that I have been to, and there's billions and billions of trees there. But does anyone really live in some of these remote areas? Not really. What is it? 98% of the population lives in 250 kilometers of the U.S. border. Yeah. So, I think there's a little bit of a misbranding there in some ways. But, I did ask him what job does he plan on getting, and he said the service industry. So he said like at Tim's. These are $15.20 jobs. So when we look at the impact on our GDP, our GDP has fallen, and at least by 0.4% since the year before. But we've grown, and we are a population of 41 million right now.
So you ran in 2019. You weren't successful, but you didn't give up, and you ran again in 2021. What do you think changed, and what was simpler the second time around?
Well, I wasn't successful in winning the seat the first time, but it was a huge success for my self-development and to let other people know that you can run and you don't have to be running with the regular dinosaur parties. You can, because PPC is almost independent when you think about it. We have a great platform, great policies, but there's going to be no whip in Parliament so that you can take on some of the policies that are there, and then you can have your own policies that would align with the values of the PPC for your constituents if your riding is of a unique quality, right? So in 2021, because I knew that it wasn't that difficult to run in 2019. I had overcome a lot of the anxiety that I felt in 2019 from being called white supremacist and that. But when you're not, it's not going to really bother you. Anyways, when you know the truth, it's not going to bother you as much. Hold on, maintain that character. Okay? You know your personality. So in 2021, it was all about making sure that Canadians' rights were upheld. And we knew that it was unconstitutional to force people to take medical treatment that was still under trials, experimental. And also, I felt, because I have two businesses, I'm a sole proprietor, and both those businesses had to shut down. And there were other businesses that were allowed to stay open. And so I felt like the government was choosing who was an unnecessary Canadian, a non-essential Canadian, And there were others who were essential Canadians. And I'm like, so you're dividing the population into essential and non-essential. Who does that? If somebody has to make money for their family to survive, you need to make the money. And you know what? We needed to push back against that, because there are many people, like, I'm in an industry in one of my businesses that is probably 95% women. And those businesses had to shut down. Can you imagine? It's like the women chose to be in this aesthetic field and provide services, personal services to our country, and yet we were not allowed to work. And we were people that were providing taxes, HST, and services to people here, and yet we had to shut down and not be able to make any money. And then we were given $2,000 CERB. There were, I had lasers in my office that had to be paid for, and I had rent now, and then I had equipment for my fitness business. There were a lot of things that had had monthly payments. Those monthly payments aren't going to go away. Neither is your mortgage, neither is your car payment, neither is your insurance for your car or your life insurance. So yeah, there were times like, it's like, yeah, this makes no sense. The government doesn't understand that this is not the right approach. Focus protection was the right approach. Don't lock down our economy. Protect those that you think are vulnerable to a fatal COVID case. So I fought for these people, and I felt that it was my duty to do that as someone who was running to represent Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
I should apologize. I should have chosen my words more carefully when I said you were unsuccessful. You were successful in promoting the party and paving the path for others.
Mm-hmm.
You use a phrase, and we've talked about this, entrepreneurialism. Why do you think that's so important for Canada?
Well, most entrepreneurs want to be independent of any government subsidies or grants or anything. Depending on what the industry is, but they just want to be able to run their business on their own hours, where they want to do it, and who they want to serve, and not be told that they can't serve certain people, or we have to do these things, and if you don't, you can get a fine. The backbone of the Canadian economy was always small businesses. So when you think of entrepreneurship, you think about someone beginning a business. And I used to work for people that had started a business. We had under 300 employees, so that's a small business. And the people who are in that business, the employees, they're of utmost importance, and we have to look after them. And that's one of the things about entrepreneurship. It's like, how are we going to make money? What are we going to offer Canadians or, the globe? What are we going to offer? And is it going to be the best product and service we can offer? And then we're going to receive capital for those goods and services. And a robust economy will have, it's a free market economy, right? So entrepreneurs are the backbone, as a lot of people will say. And I know that I was saying this before, Frank Stronach, who was talking about a robust democracy also has a very solid and robust economy. And he was an entrepreneur. He started from one employee, then grew and grew and grew. And he has, I think he has 18,000 employees now. And that's not a small business anymore. That's a business that supports our economy. So it's important. Entrepreneurship, developing ideas, developing products that can be provided to our people, to our citizens, and then actually creating an income from that. It's very important.
And I'm sorry, but I have to ask for your opinions on what's happened to Frank Stronach. He's written a bunch of articles critical of the government financial and economic monetary policy in the National Post, and now they're hitting him. He's like a 90-year-old billionaire, but they're hitting him with a 30-year-old sexual assault claim.
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
thoughts
Well,
on that?
censorship is, I tell you, it sucks, right? Um, they want people to self-censor and not criticize the government. But we live in a free nation where we should be, because we should be listening to people's ideas on how to improve our prosperity, improve the future for the next generation. We have to listen to all ideas, even if they're bad. We can say, "Oh, that was a bad one. Maybe it needs to be modified." When you talk to these people like Kevin O'Leary, even he talks about investment. He talks about taxes. High taxing people at a very high rate. If you go above a certain percentage, there is a principle that actually says that you go beyond that person's ability to understand, like, why am I being taxed at 60%? I'm not going to work as hard, because it seems that every time I work harder, someone else is benefiting from my hard work. So there is a point where we have to look at how are we going to stimulate investment in Canada, and how are we going to stimulate our economy. If we tax everyone, at what point are people going to stop working? They may work. And we don't, there are other countries like Sweden and Denmark. And people will ask me, as we have these discussions in our community, well, Michelle, why can't we have free dental care, free eye care? Why can't we have that? Sweden has it. And, yeah, they do have it. But look at the society. Well, things are changing, but they were a more homogeneous society, high trusting, and highly educated. And they knew, each person knew what they had to do to keep that economy going, to keep the services going, to keep the programs going. But when you have a heterogeneous society like ours, it's less trusting, and those programs don't go over well when you have, pockets of people that just aren't going to work because they know they can get things for free without working.
The benefits of the welfare state.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, what's your view on the recent capital gains tax rate hike?
Yeah, so I have been, even my clients talk about it. I have some clients who are seniors, and they'll talk about, the capital gains tax, 66%. It used to be 50%, so it would be 50. You say you made something, say you sold something for $3,000. Half of that is $1,500, and then you would take that $1,500, and that would be what would be taxed. Of course, the numbers would be bigger, like 300,000. And now, so they're taxed at 66%. And there are people that are concerned about that, because if they have a cottage that they want to give to their children, there could be a problem with the tax rate. And also for businesses. So I know a lot of business owners, and they're concerned about, wow, I'm going to sell my business. Now I'm going to receive less in the sales, and even in equipment sales. So we have to look at, is it really worth it to have this huge capital gains tax? If we want to stimulate the economy, if we want to create generational wealth, how are we going to do that? And what portion of our income tax that is funding the government comes from capital gains? Actually, I don't think it's that much. And so maybe we should be looking at how to stimulate the economy more than how to get more from it, in terms of draining taxpayers.
So we're coming up to 2025 now in this election process, assuming Trudeau survives that long. What are your plans? What are you going to do differently in the next election cycle?
Well, I'll tell you, we need to have a lot more outreach. And this is for the people who want to run as candidates. First of all, your EDA has to be cohesive and well-oiled, even if it's only 4 of you. please stay intact and be on the same page and know what you need to do. Know the tasks and duties that you have to undertake. So I have a media communications department or committee in my EDA. I have a campaign readiness committee. I have an events and fundraiser committee, which I'm on with Julie, and what else? Media campaign readiness, and media communications. So, and then we have our financial agent, we have our CEO, and we have volunteers. And so what we were doing, we have one meeting, we have a directors meeting once a month. So that's the CEO, directors, writing agents, the candidates, and the heads of the committees. Now, what we were doing is we were having these social events once a month. But what I thought about recently was that, these are social events where the same people seem to come. Sometimes you'll get new people, but you're not opening it up as much to people on the street. So I believe that you need to go door to door. You need to talk to people about the PPC, because we're not going to get the promotional, handouts from mainstream media. So we have to do it ourselves. Be on the street corner in your, downtown in your city with a table saying, do you know about the PPC? What questions do you have? Like, are you a concerned citizen? We need to talk more out on the street about the People's Party. I think having these social events is good, but it's not bringing not enough awareness to other people that aren't part of the PPC. And so I'm talking to people who are from the NDP, from the Green, from the Liberals, from the Conservatives. They need to know we're out there. So it's been very, very important to stay active. And, everybody's working. We're working full time. Some of us have 3 jobs now because of the affordability crisis. But it's really important to be able to put your minds together and figure out how are you going to get out there in public. Have a little brochure. Go door to door. Make sure you're with another person, of course. Go door to door. Tell people what the PPC is about.
Before transitioning to your policies that you're going to be advocating for in the next election,
Oh, yes.
I wanted to share a story. I have a member in my riding that reached out to me, and he said, like, I really like Michelle Lindsay, and he shared this post that you put out, and I'm going off memory, but you said the PPC is not right wing, the PPC is not left wing. I think you said the PPC is common sense. My question to you is, what is the PPC to you? How do you define it?
Okay, so I said it. It's not left. It's not right. It's just for Canada. And I have to tell you, my father-in-law, he recently said, "Oh, you're right wing." Like, this was last year, and it actually really bothered me that he said that, because I said I don't consider myself any wing. I consider myself a patriot and a citizen of Canada who wants the best for Canadians. That's what I want. And it doesn't mean easy for Canada. It doesn't mean giving out freebies all the time in the $10 a day daycare. It doesn't mean that, right? It means working for the next generation, for the generations to come, so they have it easier than us, helping them thrive and prosper, helping unify. So, sorry, what was your question? Oh, about the not right nor left. So I had a meeting one time, and a very smart young man who was volunteering for us, he said, there's the right and left, but then there's the other axes that we really have to look at. And it's totalitarianism and libertarianism. And that's how I see where the PPC fits in, is that we're not going for total libertarianism, and we're not totalitarians. We're in the middle, where we want to help people empower themselves, Canadians empower themselves, and live within the Constitution, and actually have the government govern, with the guidelines of our Constitution, and not go outside those guidelines. And so that's how I see things. And like I'll have libertarians come up to me. Well, I'm a libertarian. I'm like, so you don't like borders? You don't like? And some of them, well, no, I love Canada. So the pure libertarians don't even want a border. Everyone comes in and out. And I think could be a problem with that. Because you'd have too much fragmentation and no unity within what people are value or social alignment or behavior.
That was a fantastic answer. Michelle, we've touched on two of your policy issues. We've already talked about immigration and we've talked about the economy. I was going to ask you, what's going to be your message during the campaign for housing, addressing the housing issue?
Oh, housing. Well, the housing, we kind of foresaw that in 2019 when we said, first of all, you're not creating any extra housing or any extra infrastructure, and you're bringing all these people in. Where are they going to live? So, I was listening to Max recently, and I really believe that there needs to be a slowdown or a moratorium on immigration. And some people may not agree with me. Like, this is my opinion now, where there are people here, like healthcare is a big issue. A lot of foreign workers now are coming in on, well, a lot of healthcare workers are coming in on foreign worker visas, and a lot of is concentrated in the healthcare system. Put a moratorium on immigration, but if somebody is going to fill a position that Canadians can't fill, well, I'm all for that. But a Canadian can't fill it. If we can't find a Canadian to fill it, then the person can come in and fill it. That's how I see things. But this willy-nilly stuff where you just bring in people and then they decide where they want to work, that doesn't work for us because they're filling positions that other Canadians can fill. And when you actually look at the low-income positions like, Tim's, McDonald's and that, there is a negative correlation between the pay and how many people are coming in to fill those positions. So Canadians can fill them, and it should be more competitive for Canadians to fill those positions first. And I believe it keeps down the pay, the wages. There was a study done, and I can send that to you. And they talked about the negative correlations with low-income positions and maintaining a low-income base for those positions. So we want our Canadians to be able to benefit from rising compensation rates. For me, I see targeted immigration or a moratorium, like I said, or a moratorium on all immigration till we figure out what we're doing. But also, I think that when someone's foreign worker visa has expired, student visa has expired, worker visa has expired, they're not allowed to stay in Canada. They're committing a crime if they're staying past the date of that expiration. So we should have the right to deport those people, and we should enforce that so people understand that, the end of my visa is coming up. I have to make arrangements to get on a plane and go back home. These are people that have homes in other countries. It's not like they're refugees. They have homes.
Another issue that's you told me it's very important to you is health. So I kind of want to ask you about our healthcare system. What are your views on it? What do you think we should be doing better?
Well, I know that there is a lack of healthcare workers, so we have to address that. The gentleman that I work with here at my clinic, he is actually a dermatologist from Egypt, worked in Kuwait, and also served expats in Saudi Arabia. He got high points as a dermatologist to come in here and practice. And then when he came in, they refused his certifications, even though he had worked on Canadians in Saudi. So, he has friends who I speak to who are now farmers or driving cabs. These guys are cardiac surgeons. These guys are specialists. There has to be a program for them to fast track. When I was in the dental field, in the medical device field, I met dentists from all over Europe, and there were people that could have given the lectures that I gave on implant dentistry, and they had practiced for 15 years, and now they were at Dalhousie taking recertification for 2 to 3 years. And it costs a lot of money. These people need to start working. So there has to be some kind of a change in the recertification process. Make it easy for them to recertify themselves, and also have them job shadow surgeons, have them understand what the Canadian standards are. There is a way of doing that without being so onerous on these people and putting them into the healthcare system. Here we have 150,000 people that are without doctors, right, GPs or primary caregivers in Nova Scotia. We have people that were not vaccinated who went to other jobs, and so those jobs weren't filled. And it's important to know the data on pandemic readiness. I mean, like, there were people, oh, you can't work here because you're not vaccinated. You're going to spread it. It wasn't about spreading. Pfizer said that was never, that was never tested, that COVID vaccination on transmission. And so we really need to look at what's best for our people and what's best for the economy. I had a friend recently who was in the hospital, and she said she was probably out of it for about 3 days, woke up and heard foreign languages being spoken around her. She said, I thought I was going crazy. And she said, I thought, okay, I'm hallucinating or that. And she was really scared. And she said she found out that she wasn't crazy, that these were new healthcare workers that hardly spoke English and were speaking Spanish. And so, there are some healthcare workers that their language isn't that great in English, and they're providing our Canadians with healthcare. And I think that there needs to be, some kind of standard that they have to pass for the English language. And if they're not going to pass it, they have to be fast-tracked on a language program before they get here. We're in such dire need now, though. We seem to be compromising some of the communication skills that we require when we're dealing with patients. So, the healthcare, yes, it's in turmoil. I actually am a functional aging specialist trainer. I train people. I have my own program. I'm out of my gym, and I train people to stay out of the healthcare system. And I keep people healthy.
It's an interesting approach to health. Stay away from healthcare. One more question pertaining to healthcare. In BC, I believe in November of 2022, we passed Bill 36. I'm not going to quiz you on it, but they got rid of doctor-patient confidentiality. And now in one of the maritime provinces, I think Nova Scotia, they basically made it so that the government has access to your medical records. Does this concern you? How much or not at all?
It does. It concerns me because if the government had access to your files and decided, may not be this government, could be another government, a tyrannical government that comes in to Nova Scotia, and they say, well, you know what? There's the bird flu now. Oh, we must vaccine everyone now. So we have access to their files. So let's go through and let's see who's not vaccinated and who is. I just don't want that type of access to my information by a government. They don't have the right. And I'll tell you, Gus Grant, the head of the College of Physicians, he wasn't very happy about it. Many doctors were not happy about the release of this information because they said, we have doctor to patient confidentiality. In 2006, I believe, PPC came into effect. PPC was about protecting your medical information, and only caregivers could have your medical information. At the time, I was helping run a dental implant lab and prosthetic lab in downtown Halifax. And I remember calling patients and saying, You got to come in. We're going to do a color match for your crown. And you wouldn't believe how many patients were like, well, how do you have my information? And this is just to match a crown, which will be delivered to their doctor so that the doctor can deliver it to them in their mouth. And I had to explain that we were part of the circle of care. Therefore, we actually had access to the information that we required to actually create the crown. So fast track to 2020, 2021, where coffee servers had access to your medical information. Think about that. So I think it's really important for the doctors to maintain confidentiality with that information. And, we did have, hospitals had access and doctors did have access to your file. So if I had to go to Cape Breton and something happened to me, they could access my file from the Nova Scotia Health website or their information data. But the government couldn't do it. So the government says they want it to improve healthcare. All they have to do is tell doctors or ask doctors, what are the things that you're seeing that have increased? What requirements do we have to fulfill in the healthcare system? That's all they needed to do. They don't need access to our information.
Michelle, I have one final question, but I was going to share something. So if you just, if you can be patient.
And I'll advertise my PPC mug.
It's a purple glittery mug.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This guy right here, I can't pronounce his name. Kian Bexty, I think. I'm going to read it because you're on a phone. Interesting. If Maxime Bernier ran instead of this Dennis Wilson fella, and if they just got 1.08% better, the Liberals would have won last night's election instead of the Conservatives. He's making a charge of vote splitting. What's your response?
Well, people tell me that, first of all, this has been a thing with versus the PPC and Conservatives. And I always say, no one owns my vote. We're in a democracy. Leaders earn my vote. They don't deserve my vote. So that's one thing. And also, if the Liberals really did win, what? I always think about, well, geez, there was NDP voters, Green voters, and Liberal voters. The NDP and the Greens are pretty much on board with the Liberals. What do the Liberals say about that vote splitting? But no, just nobody owns your vote. Just remember that. No one owns your vote. And I see a problem in our elections. I really do. I see people being voted out. Well, we must get Trudeau out, so I'm voting for this. I'm voting, Michelle, I can't vote for you anymore. I'm voting for the Conservative Party. I'm like, why? Oh, well, we need Trudeau out. And so I said, so you're voting someone out, not something in that you really want to see in Canada. And that's the problem. So it's always back and forth, back and forth. And, in 2021, when I spoke to people who were voting Liberal again, which I was really surprised. Some of these people, I believed were Conservatives. They were kind of brainwashed in that they said to me, Michelle, the Liberals kept us safe. The Liberals kept, and I said, oh, safe and effective. This whole thing, brainwashing and hijacking people's brains that, you have to wear the masks, you have to be vaccinated, you have to be boosted every 120 days or 190 days. People don't really understand how much infiltration into their lives the government had that time. And it's really important to be voting in your principles, your values, what aligns with you, what resonates with you, in terms of those policies. What do you want to see in Canada? Do you want to see standards diminish? Our standards are diminishing. Our GDP per capita is lower. Therefore, the living standards are lower. We want to see a rise in living standards. My parents wanted to see me have a better life than they had. I want to see my kids have a better life than I had. However, I don't see that happening right now. And I have 3 children, and I want to see them have prosperous and thriving lives where they know they have the freedom if they want to open a business, if they want to work for someone, if they want to provide ideas on how to improve our country. There's no censorship. I want them to have a glorious life.
If I can share my 2 cents here, this gentleman, Kian Bexty, I've been following him for a while. He's not very good at covering his tracks, and he kind of reveals himself a little too much. So I think by, as you mentioned, by completely overlooking the fact that the NDP and the Greens technically split the vote as well, and by doing this like mental gymnastics, but saying that had we gotten 1.08% more, maybe we would have split the vote, ergo we must never split the vote. I think this is just it's an intimidation tactic, as you mentioned. People should vote with their conscience.
There are a lot of people who are trying to strategically vote. But, if we were in proportional representation right now, we'd be sitting in the House of Commons with 16 seats, the PPC. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, just think about that. That's why the populist movement is gaining momentum in Europe. Well, first of all, it's gaining momentum because, you see, they're kind of like our foreshadowing. They do things before we do. So we see the problems with immigration, and they are now taking steps to, improve their cities, their countries. Now they're seeing the problem that they're experiencing the problem with fragmented enclaves. I can't go there. Like, my descent is Swedish and German, and Scottish and English. I could never go back to Malmo, Sweden. Apparently, that's a Islamic enclave, and I would need to, have a hijab and that to, make sure I was protected. I could never go back there. So, we want to make sure that we're looking at historical facts, not erasing. We're looking at historical facts and going, okay, we see that could be a problem, and we need to be able to take action and be proactive, not reactive, more proactive, right? In the dental field, when we were doing implant dentistry and we were talking to people on how to have successful cases, we would say, go to the courses where the doctors have done thousands and thousands of implant replacement and restoration on those implants, because they're going to tell you what problems they've had to save you hair and sleep and stomach lining. You'll know what not to do because they've told you how not to do it or how to do it. And so that's what I see in politics. It's like, okay, foreshadowing, we see it now, we're seeing the problems, we can avoid those problems, but we have to take action now.
Michelle, we're coming up on the end of the episode. I always like to leave the viewers with a message of optimism. So what's your message for Canadians?
We have to think about ourselves first. We have to think about our nation first. We have to think about our people first. And when we have immigrants coming in who say that, I'm a doctor, I can serve you. Well, we have to also look at, what brain drain are we doing to their country? We have no problem taking away from other people's countries. I get that. But there are some times when you can actually help improve someone's nation by saying, you can come here, we'll teach you how to do things, and we'll send you back to improve your nation. I can see that happening here in Canada, where we help other nations, but first we have to help ourselves. And so we have to look at, what are we doing for Canadians? And how are we putting our citizens first? And a great role model is President Bukele of El Salvador. He decided that he wasn't going to look at the globalist agenda and serve the UN first. He said, I need to serve my people first. That's who I have to serve. And that's the kind of government you want. Serve your people first, then you can save others later. Thank you.
Miss Lindsay, where can people go if they want to know more about you or if they want to follow you?
If they want to follow me, they can follow me on Twitter. And I don't even know my handles anymore. Sorry. I think it's Vote Michelle PPC. I'm on Instagram. You can find me there. And you could probably put those links in the comments, Payman. I'm on Instagram under Canadian Source, actually. And yeah, that's it. And then we have our EDA. Our EDA is Halifax Regional PPC.ca.
Miss Lindsay, thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.